You should never pay your way through graduate school, especially not for a PhD. In fact, if you're thinking about doing a PhD, you should be getting paid to do your own research. But graduate school is confusing, and a lot of people don't understand how funding in graduate school actually works. So in this video, I'll be breaking it all down and telling you exactly how I funded the past 5 years of my PhD. Hey friends, my name is Alexis and I'm a final year PhD student studying oceanography and deep sea ecology at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. Over the past 5 years, I've secured different types of funding, from teaching assistantships to research grants to external fellowships like the NSF GRFP. So I've made just about every single funding situation work at some point in my PhD, and today I'll be demystifying this process for you so you know what to expect. So here's the bottom line. You should not be paying for graduate school tuition out of pocket. If a graduate program expects you to fund yourself, then that's kind of a red flag, because the norm is that your tuition will be paid for and taken care of. You'll receive a tuition waiver as well as a PhD stipend or a salary to cover your living expenses while you're doing your PhD research. And that is why most programs will only admit you if the funding situation is taken care of. So how do you actually get funding to go to grad school to do a master's or a PhD? Well, basically you have two options. And the first, and maybe the most ideal situation, is to reach out to professors and find a professor who has research funding to take on new students and who's doing research that aligns with your own interests. And option number two is to secure your own funding, often through external fellowships like the NSF GRFP, maybe Fulbright, or some NASA fellowships, or fellowship options through your home country. Once you're in, funding usually comes in three main categories, with the first being internal funding. So these are typically called graduate assistantships or GA-ships, which can either be a teaching assistantship, so a TA-ship, an RA-ship. So depending on the program, a teaching assistantship can be very, very common to fund your graduate school journey. But basically this comes with teaching responsibilities. So usually you're leading a class discussion, maybe teaching a lab section, lecturing, or grading assignments for the professor who's teaching the class. But this usually works out to about 20 hours per week spent on teaching responsibilities for that class, and the rest of the 20 hours per week you are dedicating toward your own graduate research. So the cons about a TA-ship is that you're like splitting your time between teaching and your research, so you just have less time to dedicate toward your research. You have to physically be there on campus all the time, or at least during those class times. So you have to be on campus a lot more compared to if you didn't have to teach. But a huge pro is that if you're hoping to continue in academia or become a professor one day and lead your own lab, having some teaching experience is going to be very necessary. So serving as a TA for a few years or semesters can really help you stand out, because that's something that you can put on your CV and something that you can talk about in job interviews. And the second are research assistantships. So this is where you are paid to do nothing but your research. Maybe you come in on a faculty member's grant or project. So there's probably a few tasks that you have to do relating to that like research project. For me, it looked like going out to sea to collect the samples, but it really wasn't any additional work. It was just a grant that my advisor received. I came in on the grant and was a grad student to do all of that like field work, lab work up the samples for that specific project, which later became part of my PhD dissertation. So it wasn't extra work. And the nice thing about an RA-ship is that you get to spend all of your time focused on your research. You have no other responsibilities. So yeah, it's very easy to make quick progress this way because all you have to do is focus on your research. Okay, and the second category is external funding. So by external, I mean that you're not getting this funding through your university or your department. You're actually applying to like outside organizations that are offering fellowship or funding for graduate students. So for example, this can look like the NSF GRFP, the Fulbright, NASA has some options, or maybe some fellowship opportunities available through your home country where they will pay you to go and do research somewhere. Usually with the idea that you'll be going back to your home country and like taking everything you learned from that program and bringing it to where you come from. The third category are smaller scholarships. So this can be either internal through your university or external through some other organization. But basically, when you're in grad school, there's many opportunities to apply for like small scholarships. So this could be either to support you and your own living. Maybe it doesn't have to go anything in particular. There's others that specifically cover your research costs. So if you have to pay to like do certain work in the lab, or maybe you need to pay for equipment, it can cover that. There's travel grants, which can support you going to travel for a conference to present your work. Sometimes you can use this money to like improve your skills and maybe like attend a workshop or attend a symposium of some sort. But these are usually like small pots of money, so less than $5,000. So they're not gonna cover like a huge amount of your living and like semester expenses, but it can go towards something small and just kind of like help you out. And as a PhD student, like the salary isn't great. So take money where you can and apply for small scholarships like this. And a huge pro is that you can like stack these up. You could just apply for any that seem relevant. Look online, do a quick search, and whenever you win one, it's great because you can add that to your CV. And the more scholarships and awards that you've received, the better it's going to look on your CV. If you're getting any value out of this video so far, it would mean a lot if you could please hit the like button because it helps the algorithm push this video to students like you that can benefit from seeing this video. And consider subscribing if you want more graduate school advice or behind the scenes PhD life in Hawaii. Back to the video. Okay, so just to give you a real life example of how funding might look like, I wanted to share how I've managed to fund the past 5.5 years of my PhD journey here in Hawaii. So basically, for some context, I was accepted into this PhD program at University of Hawaii, and I had a professor reach out to me saying that she saw my application and wanted to accept me. She said she had funding for this research project that was focused on midwater impacts of deep sea mining on zooplankton. So she kind of told me the project that she was a part of, what the research would focus on, and then she asked if I was interested in working with her on that project. And of course, this was like my #1 choice, so I said yes. So I basically was accepted into UH because there was a professor who was interested in me and who I was interested in the research in that project, and who had funding to accept new graduate students. That is the super key point because many PhD advisors are not always accepting new students like in any given year. It just depends on what their funding situation is like, maybe how many students they're mentoring. But I got really lucky here. So I came in as part of that grant, but I started my first semester TAing before my like research grant or research funding kicked in. So I TA'd a course for like non-science majors, and I wasn't teaching or anything. I wasn't grading assignments. I was just designing a lab course from scratch. So there was like this lecture class about like climate change and environmental science for non-science majors. And I basically just had to create a lab course from scratch. So I built like a lab manual, lab exercises, quizzes, and answer keys and things like that. So yeah, I just built a lab from scratch, no big deal. I think this lab is like currently being taught now. So it was cool to like be able to design the resources as a first year PhD student. So that was my first semester and how I covered, half of my first year. Second semester, my research grant that I was on for that deep sea mining project kicked in. So I didn't have any more teaching responsibilities. I can just fully focus like 40 hours a week toward my research, going to sea, doing lab work, all of that. So that very big grant that I was a part of, covered my funding for semester 2 of my first year, as well as all of my second year. So I didn't have to worry about anything else during that time. Then when I was in my second year of my PhD, I decided to apply for the NSF GRFP, which is an external fellowship. And I ended up receiving that huge fellowship, which covers 3 years of graduate school. So I basically had funding for years 3, 4, and 5. And that basically leads us to where I am now in my 6th year of my PhD. Crazy enough, semester 1. And my NSF GRFP ran out, so I'm not paid anymore through that. I was going to take on a teaching assistantship. I actually, signed up to do that, but my own personal life was a little bit up in the air, uncertain, and I wasn't sure if I was gonna physically be here in Hawaii and able to serve as a TA, or if I was gonna be moving to Europe with my partner. But yeah, with the green card situation and everything was up in the air. So I couldn't commit to serving as a TA and being there in person for this entire semester. So it turns out that I'm actually staying in Hawaii. So it turns out that we're actually staying here in Hawaii till May. So I will be around, but I'm not currently TAing right now. I'm just living off of savings, paying tuition myself for 1 credit, and then paying the UH student fees that you have to pay every semester. So this is the only year where I'm paying my PhD out of pocket, and I would highly recommend that you don't do this because there's no need to, right? There's so many other options to fund your PhD, as I mentioned. And next semester, I'm actually hoping to find a TA-ship that's gonna cover me until I graduate in May. So I will no longer be self-funding my PhD next semester. It was just this one because everything was up in the air. So that is basically how graduate school funding works, and those are your options. You can either find an advisor who has funding to take you on through an RA-ship, or a department that has funding to accept new graduate students, maybe through TA-ships, or secure external fellowships like I mentioned before, like the NSF GRFP and the Fulbright, which are gonna give you a little bit more independence and flexibility. If you've made it this far, you're gonna love the next video where I talk about how to TA for the very first time. And if you're in graduate school or thinking about graduate school, this video is gonna be very helpful for you because you're probably going to need to TA at some point. And if you're a US citizen in STEM, then don't miss the video that I did on the NSF GRFP.